Newmont just reported Q4 earnings and 2020 financials. So in this video, let's take a look at some of the important numbers for the Q4 and 2020 financials. So first of all, let's take a look at their gold reserves. So as you can see that they replaced 80% of reserves depletion in 2020. So now you can see that their total gold reserves is around 94 million ounces. And in addition, they have over 100 million ounces of gold resources. So usually for producers, I don't really look at the gold resources simply because a lot of the gold resources are in measured and indicated category and inferred category, right? So like the ounces might not be like economical, right, at current gold price. So that's why I usually don't look at the gold resources. And as a producer, you should always focus on the gold reserves because that's where the production came from. So you can see that their total gold reserves and resources breakdown. So you can see 35% of the gold are in North America, and then 33% is in South America, 20% is in Australia, and then 12% is in Africa. And then in addition, if you look at the chart on the right, you can see gold equivalent ounces. So this is just basically the way they calculate production number from other metals. So it's easier for like reporting purposes. So you can see that other than gold, they have 65 million ounces of gold equivalent ounces reserves. And in addition, 107 million ounces of gold equivalent ounces in resource category. And you can see 75% of them is in copper, 12% is in silver, and 13% is in other metals such as lead and zinc. So you can see they actually have a lot of resources in copper. So you can see that they have 41 billion pounds of copper in reserves and resources. And then they have 1.3 billion in silver as well in reserves and resources. So now let's take a look at these two reserves tables. Yeah, so one is for copper and one is for silver. So you can see that in the copper reserves table, it'll tell you that how much of the 41 billion pound of copper is in reserves category, right? So that's what we want to focus on, right? So you can see from this copper reserves table, you can see that their total copper reserve is actually 15 billion pound, right? So out of the 41 billion, 15 billion is in reserves, right? So that's what we want to focus on, right? Reserves, not resources. Now, if we look at the silver reserve table, you can see that if you look at the total silver reserves is around 600 million ounces. So you can see that almost half of the 1.3 billion ounces of silver is in reserves category. Okay, so now let's move on to their production profile. So you can see that in 2020, Newmont produced total gold equivalent ounces of 6.9 million ounces. So that's include 5.9 million ounces in gold, right? And then 1 million in other metals that was converted into gold equivalents. And then the all-in sustaining cost for 2020 is $10.45, right? And then if we look at their next 5 years production guidance, you can see that from 2020 through 2025, their total gold equivalent ounces is around 7.4 million to 8.6 million ounces, and with all-in sustaining costs around $800 and $900 per ounce. So you can see, despite how big the company is right now, they do still have pretty good, decent growth. So you can see, depending on the higher end of or the lower end of the guidance, you can see potentially increased gold production of 10 to 20% compared to 2020, right? And then most important part is the all-in sustaining cost number, right? So they are decreasing their all-in sustaining cost number, so which is good, right? So the lower the better, the higher margin, right? So now if we look at some of their financial numbers for 2020, so you can see that total sales, so the revenue for 2020 is 11.5 billion in USD, okay? And then the breakdown for the revenue is about 10.3 billion is in gold, and then 155 million is in copper, and 510 million is in silver, and then the rest of them are in lead and zinc. Right, so you can see the gold production is more than 90% of the total production, and then their second largest revenue is from silver, and then from the total revenue of 11.5 billion, they generated cash flow from operation of 4.9 billion. All right, and that translated to free cash flow of 3.6 billion. And then if we look at their balance sheet numbers, you can see that cash on hand is around 5.5 billion. With debts of 6 billion, and then it gives us the net debts of 500 million. So in terms of the balance sheet, I think they have very good balance sheet. They have a lot of cash, even though they have 6 billion in debts, but they still have a lot of cash. So that means that their net debt is only 500 million, and for the company of their size, 500 million is nothing. And then if we look at some of the valuation ratios that I always like to use is price to cash flow ratio and price to sell ratio. So if we look at the price to cash flow ratio is 9.3 times, and then the price to sell ratio is 4 times. And then usually you use these two ratios to compare with other gold producers. And then lastly, let's take a look at how Newmont generates value to shareholders. So you can see that. So basically Newmont just increases their dividend again in Q4. So now it's at 55 cents per share, and their current dividend yield is around 3.8%. So in 2020, they did a share buyback of $1 billion, right? And then they gonna have another $1 billion share buybacks for 2021. And that's how they generate value to shareholders through dividends and share buyback.